Okay, welcome back. Today we're going to do a copy of an academic study by an artist named Francois Biennourry. It's a French academic artist. And I have selected this drawing, which is a kind of androgynous figure, because it's gridded out in an 8-head grid. So you can see that the proportions are approximately head size. The reason the top head doesn't fit in the top box is because of the hair and the way the chin is tipped down and the body's a little bit tilted back, but we're gonna still have a general sense of how this fits in an 8-head schema. So we're gonna start out with a really simplified little box to represent the way the head is tilted down, the top of the head hitting the top of the box and back, and the chin coming into the second box like this, and the back of the neck creating this little negative shape in the back corner of this box. Obviously, if you're doing this at home, you're going to have to create this grid yourself. My grid is 1-inch blocks. I had my students do 1.5-inch blocks. All that matters, though, is that they're the same size and you have 3 by 8. Now we're going to look at the direction of the rib cage. Let's go ahead and look at this negative shape. I hope everyone knows what I mean by negative shape, but we're looking at the way that the shape created between the box and the contour of the figure. So this shape here. I usually approach the figure more from positive shapes than negative shapes, but it can be a useful shortcut if a drawing is gridded like this to look at the negative shapes. So notice we're going to go all the way down to the bottom of this box. I like to use fractional thinking, and I would observe that the intersection here is in about the middle of this line. You see that? And then we go a little further, and that's when we change directions and come out here. And we're going to go ahead and use another negative space on the other side to help us with these contours. See that shape there? When you're drawing negative spaces, you can stop thinking about anatomy for a minute and just think about the shapes. As I often say, it's as if you were copying the shape of a state on a map or a country on a map. Notice that this elbow comes just a little past the center of this line. It's a little lower than center, and then we come up like that. And this arm intersection of the top of the bicep here stays well inside this corner. It turns a little more vertical as it follows the deltoid muscle, and then it comes up right under where we put the chin, like that. So to revert a little bit to some sort of inside-out thinking, think about this rib cage form, which is on an axis tilted this way. you always want to look for the spine in a figure like this, which is flowing the same direction that the rib cage is moving. The ribs are in a fixed relationship to the spine, so when you can see the spine, that's always going to tell you which way the rib cage is tilting. And then, as is typical, the pelvis is tipping the opposite direction, tipping forward a little like that. It's useful to think about the way we hold ourselves upright is almost like the way a suspension bridge works. It's like a series of opposing forces that are, musculature is holding these joints upright, and that's how we're able to stand on 2 feet. A little bit of trivia I learned in graduate school was that the butt is actually one of our most distinguishing human features. No other mammal has such developed gluteal muscles as we do, and that's because they're very involved in holding us upright. Okay, so this curve is almost centered between this curve here and the corner. It's a little closer to this curve. And then this flows down, and just above this line, it meets. These 2 lines meet. So just as the gluteal muscles are holding the pelvis upright, the leg is held straight by the quadriceps muscles, which are here in the front of the thigh. So you get a feel for these rhythms. It's these back and forth curves that are part of the beauty of the human figure. The knee is intersecting just shy of halfway across that line. The back of the knee is just behind this line. The heel comes just outside this box. We can sort of use another negative space here to help us see what's going on, so this is about 2/3 of the way across here, and this is about 1/3 of the way across here. So I mark 2/3 and 1/3, and then just do a nice smooth curve in between. Then I straighten out a little and I connect with that heel. Notice that the knee joint is hitting right about at our 2 head mark. The trochanter of the femur, which is indicated by this little shadow right here, is right about at our 4 head mark. And those are some of the main proportions that we've learned so far. So the back of this heel is just behind this line. The front of the leg, of the lower leg, is very straight because there's hardly any musculature on the front of it. It's almost all in the back. And the back of the leg is much more curved. In the same way that doing your measured self-portraits is useful because it helps you avoid any huge errors, sort of forces you to draw things the correct scale. Doing a few gridded drawings like this is not a bad idea for training. It's similar to a lot of academic artists do a lot of measuring before they even make a line, so they basically figure out all the proportions before they've drawn anything at all. But I don't recommend it as a daily practice. It's not a lot of fun. It's not very instinctive. Okay, and we're going to do a little overlap here of the arm and the rib cage. And notice about a third of the way into this box is this line which represents the cloak kind of hanging down. So that'll be a useful construction guideline. And this curve at the elbow stays just inside that. And I think we're going to zoom in before we try to do this hand. Yeah, this little area with the hand and the face are by far the most complicated region of the drawing. So I'm going to give you a minute to catch up, and then we're going to focus on that. I'm going to start with creating this negative space, the part of this square that is not occupied by figure, as a way for us to get started. So that's the shape we're going to be looking for. Again, don't think of it as anatomy, think of it as like Texas or Florida or something. Just like, we're just going to be copying that shape. So no matter where you are, let's do this one square together, because this is going to be the hardest area. We already know that this chin cuts down just a little ways into this box. And then there's a gap. And then the deltoid that we talked about. And this negative space. This is where negative spaces are really useful to look at, like when two sections of limbs are coming close together. It helps us to see the gap in between. And then we've got to somehow curve up and around before the thumb is about level with the top of the chin. So it's sort of down here. And it's foreshortened, so that's why the thumb looks shorter than it should. And I've sort of made the forearm a little too chunky. Yeah, this is where I kind of screwed up. So this, notice that this just goes a little bit into this corner, and like that. Zoom in a little bit on my drawing too. And this is what's called a lost profile. Means that the face is turned away, so we can still see a little bit of the features, but not too much. So we've got these couple of overlaps here. And this is where I would use some fractional thinking again and find the center of this box. So this is about a quarter of the way over, and the profile starts about halfway up in this box and a quarter of the way over. So it has to fit in this little area, curves in a little and then out again. The nose projects past the profile just a little bit right there, and then there's a little bit of eyelid and eyelash showing there. And that face looks awfully small, but hair is always bigger than people think it is. So by the time we get all this hair blocked in, and I better move this over again. You see how small the face is compared to all this cranium and hair. Every beginner is going to want to make the face twice this size, but don't do that. So the scale of my face was looking just a little small to me. What I'm gonna do is just raise that little eyelid about 1/16 of an inch, if that, and make the nose a little longer. These are the kind of things that you have to experiment with. But you see how now the face looks more to scale with the head? It was literally probably less than 1/16 of an inch alteration there. Okay, slide over. There's all we have left of this hand. And here is I'm not going to get too hung up on the cloth right now. Okay, zoom back out. So before I lock down the contours, which I feel are not quite perfect yet, what I like to do is a first shading, shadow map and first shading. So we're going to do that now. And we're going to keep things intentionally a little vague. there's a piece of shadow there. There's a piece up through here. So just quickly do what you see me doing here. Here's this form is the external oblique. Here's the iliac crest here and the external oblique, and this muscle is creating a little form shadow that goes around it like that. It takes a while to appreciate just how the contours of the shadow map say as much about the form as the contours of the shape itself. There's a little shadow edge right up here. Okay, now, as a review for some of you, first shading follows your most comfortable hand direction. So I'm left-handed, my first shading is gonna go like this. You're gonna shade the other way if you're right-handed, please. And we're leaving things intentionally kind of vague. The goal, and this is kind of a theme of this class, is we are trying to quickly get our drawing to a point where it looks volumetric, and our brain's going to see it as a three-dimensional form. And once that kicks in, you're going to make much better choices about the contours. A lot of beginners make the mistake of thinking they just have to get all the outlines exactly right and then they can start shading. And that's not usually the most efficient or effective way to go about it. You want to lay in some tones early on in the process, because as soon as these tones are in, the errors that you've done in the form itself are going to really stand out to you in a way that they do not when your brain is just looking at a web of outlines. This is not going to be a close copy. In other words, I'm not trying to match the way that this artist represented tone with hatching or otherwise, because this is an academic study that I'm guessing they probably spent like 10 or 12 hours on. And we're going to do this in less than an hour, so it would not be realistic to try to do a close copy. I'm going to throw in some of this cloth. If you don't have time to do that, don't worry, I'm not going to assess that, so don't stress about it. Cloth does give a more balanced effect to the overall drawing, but so now when we hit the final stage of the drawing, which is refining these contours, my theory is that you're going to do better because of the ability of your brain to see what you've done so far in 3 dimensions. So we'll test that theory in a minute. Okay, we're gonna get into some final effects now. I'm gonna zoom in again on this top half of the drawing. So the goal here is, now that first shading's in, now we're gonna really reinforce some of these outlines. You'll hear some art teachers say there's no outlines in nature, but that's kind of a stupid rule. I mean, we're not making photographs, we're making drawings, and the degree to which you reinforce your outlines is completely up to you. And it's completely appropriate to, this artist obviously really grooved on making some nice, clean, hard outlines. Probably because this was a study for something bigger, but we can do the same thing. There's a subtle kind of variation in line weight. You can see that these outlines on the shadow side of the figure are a little darker than the outlines on the light side, which is usually a good idea. And if you want to get some of the effect of this actual tonal shading, you can experiment with using the side of your pencil instead of the tip. You see what I'm doing? Just holding my pencil very close to the paper, and I am shading that way. Don't confuse this with smudging. You can see that speckled kind of look to this drawing. That's the grain of the paper. So we can tell that the artist was dragging the pencil across the paper like this, but not smudging. If there was smudging, the graphite would have gone down into the grain and covered up those areas. I just noticed this strap. You see this strap kind of going up and around the shoulder. And crossing the spine here and winding up down here. And you'll notice how beautifully this shoulder blade kind of projects out towards us. And that effect is achieved by going just a little darker along this edge and creating a real pop of contrast between the light here and the shadow here. Followed by some reflected light bouncing up under the shoulder blade here, and then a little bit darkening again. More reflected light, and then more darkening. So it's that sequence of core shadows, reflected light, cast shadow, core shadow, reflected light, cast shadow that creates the roundness of any organic form. Another place we see real darkening is right under here, this shadow accent under the armpit. And there's a beautiful little bifurcation here of this crease, and followed by this pretty dark shadow. And as I emphasize this outline, you see how my initial take on it was a little too straight. So I'm going to bring out this curve as it curves out over the external oblique. And intersects here with the front of the iliac crest. The iliac is overlapping the abdominal muscles here. And then there's a little hint of some musculature coming from behind the iliac crest here. That could be sartorius. I could be wrong though. But this little sequence of overlapping forms is going to really help to describe what's going on there. The back comes down below the iliac crest. And I'm going to straighten out this contour just a little. One way that academic artists conceptualize the pelvis is as a box. So there were some very subtle kind of simplifications in the way this pelvis is drawn that are really box-like. You see how there's like a crease right here. This line is very straight. This shadow edge is straight. I would bet that if you saw a photograph of this model in this pose, the boxiness of the pelvis would not be as apparent to you. So a great drawing is going to not only convey what visual information was there, but how the artist was understanding it. And you can definitely feel the boxiness of that form. Okay. Before we get too far down, let's go ahead and go a little darker through here. Now, I'm not too good at shading with the side of my pencil, especially not when it comes to getting a soft edge. Notice that this edge where the light ends on the arm has to be pretty soft. I'm more comfortable doing it, hatching it like this, but you can try both ways. This kind of hatching, to me, shows the curve of the form a little better. But it's certainly not better. It's just sort of more like what I like to do. And you'll also notice these academic drawers, you can always read the reflected lights, but they're very subtle. Like a beginner is going to tend to exaggerate See the reflected light coming up under this arm? It's there, but it's almost impossible to read in this drawing. And that's another intentional aesthetic choice.
Burning smell near my desk.
Okay, working our way down. Well, I guess I didn't finish this hand. No, that's good enough. Yeah, let's work our way down. Notice I need to smooth this transition between the bottom of this cheek and the back of the thigh right here. Again, this is not a coloring book. You are not just creating outlines and then shading them in. You're trying to continuously refine your outlines with the direction that comes from having the shading there. So there's a little bit of core shadow along the edge of this cheek here, and just a slight darkening on the other side of it. Just creates just a little bit of reflected light in there. Very, very subtly handled. And this is a core shadow that runs down the thigh. This artist's knowledge of anatomy far exceeds my own, and you can bet that every little ripple of this shadow edge over the muscle underlying forms has been understood and considered. There's really nothing random about that. I noticed in some of your work this line was a little too flat, and I just noticed I made mine a little too flat also. The quadriceps are a little fuller on this model, so I'm going to pull that out. And again, my assessment of that is based on my ability to read that as a volume, which I'm doing. Okay, it's a little grainy. And I'm reading it as a volume because I've done a little more with the shading. The knee also is a little bit of a larger, fuller form. Now that you've learned proportion, this is really the best way to get better at figure drawing. And if you do copies on a regular basis, and we're gonna do a number more like this, you will be ready to draw a live figure without embarrassing yourself. Doing copies by a variety of artists helps you decide like which sorts of approaches you find most agreeable to your temperament, and practice them. And if you have a chance to take a figure drawing class in college, I think you really enjoy it, and you'll be amazed at how, with this kind of practice and training, like, you'll be doing so much better than the other students in the class who really usually come out of high school not really knowing too much about this at all. At least that's what my students tell me when they come back and visit from various colleges, including art schools. But the discipline of drawing the figure from life is really really amazing. You know, like, these models are paid to pose for drawings, not photographs. You have to pay a model a lot more to pose for a photograph, which means you're not allowed to take a picture of what you see in a life drawing session. What that means is when the pose is done in the class, it's done forever. No one's ever going to see it again. So you have a limited amount of time, a set amount of time, whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, or 4 hours, or longer, but you have that much time to see that pose. And you learn to pace yourself, you learn what you can do in 20 minutes, you learn what you can do in 30, you learn what you can do in an hour, and you pace yourself accordingly. And everyone around you is trying to do the same thing, and the discipline of it is really an amazing thing. And there's nothing better for developing your skill. Okay, we're going to zoom out again. So notice we didn't do much with this foot because he didn't either. There may have been something obstructing your view of the foot in this final design, so it wasn't something he needed to create for his study. What we do need to do, though, is a little more with the face. So these hard edges at the very outside of the mass of the hair sort of define the form. The light ends, I'm always talking about, in drawing here, we're looking for these sort of flame shapes of shadow. You see how the darks are curving up along this irregular boundary, and this is a core shadow. It's darkest, just like we've noticed on the thigh and the rib cage, it gets darkest near the light. You see that? It's like we're coming up towards the light, and that's where it gets darkest. Then it gets a little lighter again through here, and then darker again when it curves away from the light underneath. As I often say, drawing hair is like drawing leaves on a tree. Like, you can't draw every hair, you can't draw every leaf. So you need to study the work of other artists who've spent a lot of time figuring out various shorthand systems that work for drawing hair, and then just adopt one that you like. The main problem every beginner makes is to think of it like a coloring book, like, okay, it's brown hair, so I better shade it all in the same value. Hair's actually shinier than skin, so there's more contrast in hair, not less. And you can see that pretty clearly here. There's like darker darks and lighter lights in the hair than there is, well, at least darker darks. There's more contrast in general. This kid's skin is actually a little bit shiny. You can see these highlights on the shoulder, but it's a little coarse shadow, cast shadow, reflected light sequence on the cloth right there, and a little compression fold here where the cloth is being deformed by the thumb pressing into it. But again, don't stress about the cloth if you're still trying to do the figure. Because we're working on white paper, we're not going to be able to do these highlights. So what we have to do instead is shade around them. Those are called halftones. As you probably remember, the areas, slightly darkened areas within the lights are the halftones. And those are, the key there is if you want to show your halftones, like this light on the peak of the deltoid here, you want to shade around it with a very, very light touch. Because this halftone cannot approach in darkness what's going on down here. This is a true shadow. Here, it's way darker than this halftone. And because halftones have light all around them, beginners always make them a little too dark. So your final assessment of your drawing is almost like one of those games where you look back and forth and try to spot the differences. But it's more important to spot the differences in the, not in the pattern of light and dark, but spot the differences in the forms. Like, do an inventory of the forms in your drawing and see if they're as legible as the forms in the original. So just at this point, you're on your own because you're fixing areas that are standing out to you as needing repair. And I'm going to come around in just a second and give you a hand with that. So that's going to do it for my viewers at home. I'm going to leave you with a little side-by-side so that you can pause the video and finish the drawing at your leisure. Thanks as always for watching, and we'll see you next time.